the press, they're still obsessed with this coup, quote unquote coup in Russia, the Wagner mutiny. So I thought I'd give you an update on this, right? Because when it happened, I was covering it with you, and it was kind of funny exploring all of these, all the hysteria and the hype and the various theories and so on. Prigozhin miraculously has been unexiled. So now he's no longer in Belarus. He was able to come back and he met with Lukashenko and with Putin. So Lukashenko is the president of Belarus. Nevertheless, although Prigozhin himself, had his house raided and he's no longer in Belarus and he's able to travel back to Russia, Wagner itself has moved, at least in part, if not completely, into Belarus. Okay, so just to show you this is from the BBC. I'm not going to lie, the map is not too bad, not too shabby. So, here they're showing a possible route of Wagner convoys. I love how they point out that Russia they make sure you understand in every single map they ever make that this is Russian annexed Crimea. Do you think they do that with Jerusalem and the Golan Heights? Anyway, so they're saying that the Russians allowed Wagner to go through here the M4 and then pivot into Belarus on the M5, and now they're near Minsk. Putin is now saying that Poland has ambitions in Ukraine as well, right? And he had to warn them. I mean, I don't know what Poland have to do with any of this, but it seems to be a concern that's growing on both Putin and Lukashenko's minds. I'll show you that in a second. In the Washington Post, they were pointing out that Belarus served as a staging ground when Russia launched its wide-scale invasion in February 2022, including a failed assault on Kiev, the Russian capital. Defeated Russian units then retreated back across the Belarusian border. That's a lie. There was no failed assault. There was an assault that was called off because of negotiations in Turkey. Why do they just make things up? This doesn't make sense. On the one hand, they say the Russians are so powerful and they have so many deadly weapons that they are just flattening Ukrainian cities, right? They're laying waste to the country. Then, on the other hand, they tell you, look at these stupid Russians. They couldn't assault Kiev. They couldn't even take Kiev. They had to retreat into Belarus. No, they withdrew into Belarus because they used this as a pressure tactic. In Turkey, do you remember in Turkey there were negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians to try and end the war? The condition to show goodwill from the Russians' part was that they were going to withdraw from Kiev. They were going to pull their troops back to show that they're not going to attack the capital. They're not going to, get rid of Zelensky or the top brass. That was one of the conditions. And then the Ukrainians ripped up the deal because Boris Johnson or whoever else was whispering in Zelensky's bloody ear, there are quite a few people doing that, told him to back out. So I don't know why they insert this failed assault. They never assaulted it to begin with. They surrounded it and then used it as a pressure tactic. Come on, man. Get your stuff together. This is just pathetic. It is true that the Russians put nuclear weapons in Belarus. This goes without saying. Putin and Lukashenko are very tight. Lukashenko is the one who mediated between Putin and Prigozhin, right? Let me play this clip here where they're talking about Polish troops moving closer and closer.
О переброске вооруженных сил Польши к границам союзного государства, о чем вы говорили. Мы видим, готовится почва. Допустим, одна из бригад место свое нашла в 40 километрах от Бреста. Стояли километров 500, перебросили на 40 километров. Карту я покажу, мы это все видим. И чуть больше 100 километров от Гродно, вторая бригада.
Благодаря позиции Сталина Польша получила значительные земли на Западе, земли Германии. Это именно так. Западные территории нынешней Польши – это подарок Сталина полякам. Наши друзья в Варшаве подзабыли об этом. Мы напомним.
Jesus, what a threat. Then we'll remind them. It's like some gangster from a movie. You know, there's one more clip here.
Что касается польских лидеров, то, вероятно, они рассчитывают под натовским зонтиком сформировать некую коалицию и впрямую вмешаться в конфликт на Украине, чтобы затем оторвать себе кусок пожирнее, вернуть себе, как они считают, свои исторические территории, сегодняшнюю Западную Украину. Хорошо известно, что мечтают они и о белорусских землях. Что касается политики украинского режима, то это его дело. Хотят, как это водится у предателей, что-то сдать, продать, чем-то расплатиться с хозяевами, это, повторю, в конце концов, их дело. Мы в это вмешиваться не будем. Но что касается Белоруссии, то это часть союзного государства. И развязывание агрессии против Беларуси будет означать агрессию против Российской Федерации. На это мы будем отвечать всеми имеющимися у нас средствами. Польские власти, вынашивая свои реваншистские планы, правду своему народу тоже не говорят. А правда заключается в том, что украинского пушечного мяса Западу уже явно не хватает, недостаточно, поэтому в ход планируют пустить новый расходный материал. Самих поляков, литовцев и далее по списку. Всех, кого не жалко. Скажу одно. Это очень опасная игра. И авторам подобных планов стоит задуматься о последствиях.
Let me put it this way. I think, you know, notwithstanding what Putin just said in this, you know, in these clips about Poland's ambitions, you have a lot of resentment in former Soviet satellite states towards Russia. I'm not saying that, you know, everybody who lives next door to Russia hates Russia. No. But from time to time, you know, as governments come and go, you will get, as you have in Poland right now, for example, since he mentioned Poland, or Lithuania, you know, governments that are extremely, extremely anti-Russian, you know, like really, they just hate the Russians with a passion. Now, whether that's warranted or not, I think, you know, because especially in the case of Poland, you know, Poland, they had Nazi occupation, and remember at that point we're talking about the Soviet Union, the Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet-German Pact. In Stalin's mind, he was trying to appease Hitler. I don't know where he got this idea that would buy him time or work, but you can't appease Nazis. But my point is that with Poland, you know, they had to endure Nazi occupation, and then after that, as a Soviet satellite state and a Warsaw Pact state, or member rather, you know, they were in Russia's shadow, so to speak, for quite some time. But I think the degree to which the current government in Poland are so anti-Russian, there's something wrong. You know, it's like like I said, this is especially in former Soviet states, okay, or Soviet satellite states. You know, there's like a minority of people, and you see this in Ukraine, right? With the government in Ukraine, they have such an inferiority complex because they used to be part of Russia that they will do everything possible to show that they are not Russian. And in Ukraine's case, that means joining the EU and joining NATO. But they don't understand that Western Europe, or the West in general, I'm never going to look at you, at Ukraine, as an actual ally. The fact is, you know, the proof is in the pudding. Look, Ukraine actually wants to join NATO right now and needs NATO more than ever. They still won't take it. They still won't take it. It's like the government in Kiev don't understand they're being used as bait. They just won't, you know, they're in denial. They just can't get it through their heads. They're being used as bait. And like I said, you can't generalize because Ukraine is a big country, right? So if what is Ukraine? Eastern Ukraine are pro-Russia. They don't hate Russia, right? So you have to be very specific. And like I said, we're talking about a few groups, and it's usually the governments here. So the government in Poland, the government in Kiev, they're so anti-Russian. It's like they'll do whatever they want to be seen or accepted in the West, but they don't understand they're just being used as a buffer against Russia. That's it. It's the salami tactic we talked about, right? Break up Yugoslavia, then get closer, swallow up, Lithuania and Latvia and Poland and all this, the former Soviet satellites into NATO. So now they're not only outside the Warsaw Pact and neutral. No. Now they're NATO. So you're going closer and closer, inching nearer towards Russia. They exploit that. People in Washington understand this, and they exploit this. They know that you have, if you push the right buttons, you can kind of stoke this anti-Russian sentiment and use that and exploit that to get them to make moves that are really just Washington foreign policy objectives, right? So in this case, as I said, salami tactic against Russia. Now, here in the Washington Post, they say that Poland has strengthened its eastern defenses after Prigozhin arrived in Belarus and his mercenaries launched joint military training exercises with Belarusian security forces near the Belarusian border city of Brest, according to the Polish Defense Ministry. And then here, they refer to the clips that I showed you already, where Putin is warning during a meeting with his Security Council that any aggression against Belarus would be considered an attack on Russia, and Moscow would retaliate with all the resources available to them, right? I don't know why they put it in quotation marks, because it's like when anytime Russia farts and coughs, that's aggression, no quotation marks. But anything NATO does, in this case Poland, it's never aggression, it's always defensive. Remember, it's like they agree on a shitty phrase, and then they keep brainwashing you with it and repeating it over and over. NATO's a defensive alliance. NATO's a defensive alliance. Here's another one, right? Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. They all say these exact same fucking words. It's conditioning. It's bullshit, right? Now, I really, as much anti-Russian sentiment as the current Polish government has, I don't think I mean, Jesus, I really hope they're not that stupid to think that, Wagner being in Belarus is like some kind of green light to do anything. Who knows at this point? Who knows? There are many angles to this. The idea before, if we go back to the map here, was that actually the mutiny between, the Wagner mutiny against the Russian government, some people thought that it's actually a ploy, it's a ruse, it's a charade in order to get Wagner out of Russia and flank Ukraine from the north, as you can see in the map here. But, I mean, maybe, again, we're just speculating here, so maybe, but let me put it this way. Russia moved nuclear weapons into Belarus. Why would they need to stage a mutiny just to get Wagner into Belarus? They can just do it. How can you move nuclear weapons into Belarus, but you need to fake a mutiny to get Wagner? This doesn't even make sense, right? Maybe that's what happened. I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows, right? What they discussed, those 24 of them with Lukashenko and Prigozhin and Putin, is between themselves. I'm just speculating here that if you can get nuclear weapons in, it's probably easy to get Wagner in. It's true, Lukashenko signed a decree and he authorized Wagner officially, but again, it doesn't change anything that I just said. Nayev, the general, said Ukraine's military was even allowing the possibility, however far-fetched, that Putin might authorize the use of tactical nuclear weapons while making it appear as if Wagner mercenaries were to blame for a rogue attack. Really? What does that even mean? Like, they stole the launch codes during a meeting. They just pickpocketed them. Come on, this is just stupid. I think they just don't like Wagner being up there, and they're trying to come up with the reasons for that. But I wouldn't underestimate I wouldn't underestimate the relationship between Belarus and Russia, because I know in Western press they like to kind of give you this same old crap, like Lukashenko's a dictator, just like Assad is a dictator and Gaddafi's a dictator. Like, whoever we say is a dictator is always a dictator. And he just does Putin's bidding, right? He has no independent mind or agent. He has no agency. It's always Putin who's like pulling his puppet strings. This is bullshit. How is it acceptable that, we're supposed to believe that people all the way over here in Europe, NATO, are aligned with Washington, but it's out of the ordinary that Belarus and Russia, who are fucking neighbors, don't think alike. Why wouldn't they think alike? Why is that unlikely? Why, you know, every time there's an alliance, same thing, you could pick Iran and Syria, or, you know, Iran and Hezbollah. Like, it's always something shady, right? Like, oh, it's because, you know, Assad is an Alawite and the mullahs in Iran are pulling his strings or something. You know, they make it, it's like cheap comic book shit. That's how they analyze the Western journalists. That's their analysis, because they're like children. They're morons. This is the extent of their intellectual capacity. They cannot understand anything, right? Here in Deutsche Welle, you can see they're also talking about Wagner threatening Poland, right? So basically, both sides are now talking about Poland. The worst thing that could happen now is you have a second, so to speak, a second front opening up there. Although I think this counteroffensive, they're far too occupied with it for that to happen. But I wouldn't underestimate the fact that Poland is beefing up its defenses, and the fact that Wagner is now in Belarus. Everything that you see is pointing towards escalation rather than the opposite. And this is why, you know, when they mention the failed assault on Kiev, it shows you again the mentality has not changed in the think tanks, in the governments, nor in the press. And here you can see in Deutsche Welle, they say experts agree. Who the fuck are these experts? Give me their names. How are they qualified to speak about this? Tell me. Experts agree, according to Deutsche Welle, which is German state media, the Reich media. So experts agree that Poland has now become a quote-unquote collective enemy of Russia because of its support for Ukraine. Poland, through which military equipment is being supplied, has also insisted on more sanctions against Russia and is a strong supporter of Ukrainian integration into the EU and NATO. Please look at the situation here, the way that the Polish government speaks about Russia and the other way around. This is probably, I'm telling you the truth, this is the first time I've heard Putin mention Poland in months. He almost never mentions Poland. But the other way, man, the other way around, every second the Polish government are saying Russia this and Russia that. I told you, this is that old Soviet anti-Russian resentment that's you know being brought up, right? Because they know what buttons to push in Washington and Whitehall, and how to get people riled up, and this is why Poland, which borders Russia, it's like acceptable now that you have American troops that are running equipment through Poland next door to Russia and into Ukraine. And this whole issue, it starts from this, right? All of these countries, they're former Russian Empire, Ukraine, Poland, when we talk about the Warsaw Pact countries who are now also in the EU and NATO, these are Russia's neighbors. They were part of Russia. So it's very easy to leverage that and like I said, ferment anti-Russian fervor and stoke anti-Russian sentiment, and then use it to advance foreign policy objectives that are really coming out of Washington. Because up until a few months ago, up until last year, this was unthinkable that for example, Germany was supposed to be neutral, and now they're giving tanks to Ukraine. Let's put Germany aside because that's a different animal. But nevertheless, this whole issue, the whole war in Ukraine, is because they exploit this these countries that are Russia's neighbors, and it's not that everybody there agrees with this, and that's how they split the country. And Ukraine effectively got split, right? You had people in the east who were being who are pro-Russian or ethnically Russian, being pitted against people in Western Ukraine who are so desperate to turn their backs on Russia, on their own history, and be accepted and accede to the EU and NATO, that they will do anything. And I'm talking specifically about the government, right? It's very dangerous, because it's leading to a nuclear escalation now. This is not just a problem inside Ukraine. It's a global problem now. Because if there's a nuclear war, we are all screwed. It's not just about Ukraine anymore. keep this in mind, because if you hear about, whenever you hear the Russian Empire brought up, right, the rationale that they offer you on the BBC, for example, they say Putin wants to revive the Russian Empire. So they understand that, you know, these countries have a past relationship, and they try to bring that up as to frame it as, you know, it's like Putin has imperialist ambitions or something, right? And then they leave out the part that, well, first of all, this is complete nonsense, but they leave out the part that these countries have a very close relationship with Russia. They were literally part of Russia at one point, and that not everybody actually even wanted to be separate, right? So you had millions of Russians who woke up one day in 1991 and they were in a different country, right? I think this is I'm paraphrasing a famous quote from Putin. Yeah? So it doesn't change the reality in any case. And you know, it's like they try to revive some crap from, you know, over 100 years ago about the Russian Empire, but they can't grasp that getting these countries into NATO and EU, it's more than a red line. We'll see what happens with Wagner. I'm more interested to find out what happens with Wagner in Africa, because right now with these coups that you've had recently in Burkina Faso and Mali and now in Niger, it's more important to see what Wagner does in Sudan, okay? Now with Burhan and Hemeti fighting, and you know, that is more important, or let's say just as important as them being in Belarus, I would say.